Well, I want to talk now about an inmate at Guantanamo Bay who was found dead over the weekend in his cell, one of the first detainees taken to the prison in 2002. Adnan Farhan Abdul Latif was from Yemen, and at the time of his arrest on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan, he told authorities he was seeking medical treatment for a head injury, though the U.S. military claimed he was an al-Qaeda recruit. Now, twice his release had been recommended, once in 2006 and then in 2008, but was later rejected by the U.S. Supreme Court. The details of how he died have not been released, but we do know that he's attempted suicide several times in the past, and his lawyers say he spent long periods of time confined to the prison psychiatric ward. Colonel Morris Davis is a retired Air Force attorney and a former prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay and joins me now. And Colonel Davis, from what I understand, Adnan Latif was never charged and there were no plans to prosecute him. Talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I think one thing the American public or the public at large doesn't understand is, I guess there are 167 living men still at Guantanamo in detention. The majority of those men have been cleared for transfer. They're people that the CIA, the Department of Justice, the Defense Department have reviewed and determined we don't intend to charge them with anything. We don't believe they present an imminent threat, and we don't want to keep them. But they're still at Guantanamo largely because of their citizenship.
Well, that's what I was going to say. More than half of those at Guantanamo are from Yemen. And, you know, these are men who, they don't have control over their nationality, and they also don't have control over the situation in their country. But the reason that they're not being sent back is because of the political climate there. I mean, let's broaden this. I mean, does this sort of paint a future picture for what we can expect for those men that are at Gitmo?
Well, unfortunately, I'm afraid that it's been more than a decade that many have been confined. Like Adnan Latif was just one example. He'd been there for 10.5 years. As you mentioned, he'd been cleared twice during the Bush administration to be transferred out. Yet, 10.5 years later, he was still there. And I think there are a number of other people in similar circumstances that are incarcerated for more than a decade solely because of their citizenship, which I would imagine if an American was being detained overseas by another country solely because he or she was an American, we'd be a little upset about it.
Colonel Davis, I want to do something that I don't think I've ever done before, and that is to read part of a poem. This was actually a poem written by Adnan Latif. It was called the Hunger Strike poem. As we know, he staged several hunger strikes, and I found this on the Center for the Study of Human Rights in the Americas. Basically, he wrote, quote, "They are artists of torture, they are artists of pain and fatigue, they are artists of insult and humiliation. Where is the world to save us from torture? Where is the world to save us from the fire and the sadness? Where is the world to save the hunger strikers?" And Colonel Davis, let me ask you, where is the world? Why aren't more actions being taken to deal with what's gone on here, especially considering that Adnan Latif is not the only person that is presumed to be, for all intents and purposes, innocent?
Right. Well, unfortunately, I think for the American public, after 9/11, America changed. We used to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we became the constrained and the cowardly. And I think for the last decade, 11 years now, the American public, by and large, has said, do what you got to do to keep me safe, and I don't really care what you do, referring to our government. So, if you go back a dozen years, Americans were opposed to torture. Now a majority are in favor. We were opposed to indefinite detention. Now they're in favor. So it's interesting how during the Bush administration, what so many opposed during the Obama administration, so many now accept. But I'm afraid there are people that are stuck in this Alice in Wonderland-like environment where they can spend more than a decade without ever being charged, actually being cleared to be released, and not just by the military. Adnan Latif had a habeas hearing before a judge here in Washington, D.C., Judge Kennedy, who found that the government couldn't meet a preponderance of evidence standards. That's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed a crime, but just 50.1% of the evidence could not support that he needed to be detained at Guantanamo. Of course, the Obama administration appealed that decision. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals here in Washington, they figuratively killed Boumediene, the Supreme Court decision that gave the detainees the right to habeas, and they literally have killed Adnan Latif, who gave up hope after more than a decade.
Let's talk about the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, because this is an important piece of this puzzle, and it's an important piece of, I think, a lot of puzzles that we're going to see and that we have seen. This, from what I understand, is a 3-judge panel, traditionally very conservative. What is their role, in these cases?
Well, there are 8 judges that make up the D.C. Circuit. Now, they sit in panels of 3. The D.C. Circuit, the facade, or part of the facade, was we want this to be a military proceeding. There's a Court of Appeals of the Armed Forces, which is the normal appellate court for the military. But I was around in 2006 when the Military Commissions Act was being drafted. The politicians didn't trust the normal military system, the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. They viewed the D.C. Circuit as being more reliable.
But this is a military case.
Yes.
This man was arrested by the military and dealt with in a military court. How can that then go to this D.C. Court of Appeals?
Well, they were selected to handle all the detainee cases because they were viewed as being the most reliable, trustworthy court. And if you look at their record at the Supreme Court, the Ninth Circuit, out in California, tends to get reversed more often than any other circuit. The D.C. Circuit does the best at the Supreme Court because they're the most conservative and predictable. Therefore, all these cases go through civilian channels and not through military channels.
Latif was the 9th detainee to have died in custody at Gitmo. Have there been any changes, or has anything been done to sort of deal with the fact that this is happening? That 9 people have died behind bars there.
Well, I haven't seen a lot of effort on the part of the Obama administration to, he said he wanted to close Guantanamo, but it seems to be
several
closing.
Times he said that.
Well, yeah, it's closing by attrition, not by deliberate effort of the Obama administration. But, it's ironic. The military commissions that President Bush created back in November of 2001, in almost 11 years now, they've completed 6 cases. So 50% more have died at Guantanamo than have been convicted and sentenced at Guantanamo.
This is a tough situation, though, Colonel Davis, because between the political situation in Yemen, where the majority of these detainees are from, the political situation in other countries, a question has arisen, and that is, if Guantanamo did close, where would these detainees go? The innocent ones, the guilty ones, whatever. Have there been any ideas put forth that you tend to think are valid?
Well, a lot of other countries have helped out and taken some of the detainees over the years. I mean, we've gone from 779 men down to 167, and a handful, as you mentioned, 9 have died, but most have been transferred either to their home country or to another country. But a lot of the countries that we've approached over the years said, look, why don't you help yourselves out and take one yourself? We have never taken a single detainee from Guantanamo here to the U.S. Yet we beg other countries to help us out and take them. And Congress, has made it much more difficult. The far right, who have really pandered to this decade of fear, have forbidden any of the detainees from coming to the U.S. So I think one positive step we could take is we got to go first and take a few ourselves. The Uyghurs, for instance, there's a community here in Washington that was willing to take them in.
At one time, I remember there was a prison in Illinois that was happy to take them and get the funding to do that. I'm being told one of the Al-Qaeda members, Al-Qaeda number 2, I believe, that was killed on Monday, was a former inmate at Guantanamo Bay. Anything that you've seen happen? I mean, clearly, we know President Obama said, as candidate Obama, several times that he planned to close it. What's the reason that you think that he hasn't?
I think it's been a lack of political will. I mean, nobody's going to get elected on November the 6th by saying I stood up for the rights of detainees in military detention. I mean, that's just not it doesn't look good on a bumper sticker. It's not going to win. So there's no value in taking the political risk. And I think he took office with good intentions. He encountered opposition from the far right, Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney and that crowd who said you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And at the time, the economy was crashing, health care reform was his top priority, and I just don't think he saw any value in putting political capital behind following up on his promise to close Guantanamo.
Well, we sure do always appreciate having you here. You certainly have a first-hand look at exactly what the conditions were like there at Guantanamo Bay. Colonel Morris Davis, a retired Air Force attorney and now a professor at Howard University School of Law. Thanks so much.
Sure.